Fake HOA cops slapped my grandma on the porch. Grandpa's loaded Colt roared in 5 seconds when 2 fake HOA enforcers slapped 74-year-old May Turner on her own porch. It felt like Willow Creek itself had been struck. These imposters flashing counterfeit badges and barking threats thought they could intimidate an entire town without consequence. But they didn't count on Grandpa Joe and the loaded Colt Python that roared to defend what mattered most. Just wait until you hear how one town stood its ground, and why justice, fierce and unforgettable, found its mark that day. The sun climbed slowly over Willow Creek, spilling golden light across the rooftops and gravel driveways, warming the old wooden fences that framed each neat little yard. It was the kind of morning that felt stitched together from a dozen simpler times, a morning you could almost breathe in, sweet with the scent of honeysuckle, fresh earth, and the faint distant smoke of someone's breakfast bacon sizzling on a cast iron skillet. May Turner sat in her usual place on the front porch, a place worn soft by years of habit. Her rocking chair creaked with each gentle motion, keeping time with the chirps of the waking birds, hidden high among the oaks and maples. The porch itself sagged slightly, in the middle, just enough to give it character, and along the railing hung flower baskets, so heavy with blooms, they brushed the tops of the steps. May, 74 years old, and small in frame but sharp in spirit, held a sweating glass of homemade lemonade in one hand. She flipped idly through a newspaper with the other, her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. The newsprint smudged her fingers, but she didn't mind. It was part of the morning, Ace expected and comforting, as the porch swings slow sway in the breeze. Life in Willow Creek hadn't changed much in 50 years. Folks here valued their routines, the way some people valued gold. Saturdays were for front yard mowing, neighborly chats, kids selling lemonade at makeshift stands, and the occasional parade of dogs chasing delivery trucks. Nobody hurried. Nobody locked their doors. Trouble was something that happened out there, beyond the lazy turn of the highway, beyond the cornfields that stretched so wide they seemed to swallow the sun by afternoon. Across the street, old Mr. Hendricks was already out, wearing his familiar straw hat and denim overalls, coaxing reluctant tomatoes from his stubborn garden. Further down, little Ellie Perkins and her brothers were dragging a folding table to the curb, setting up their lemonade stand with the kind of serious focus only 8-year-olds could muster. May smiled as she watched them, her heart light. Another good day, she thought. Another easy morning. The screen door behind her squeaked against its frame, stirred by the soft, humid breeze. Somewhere inside the house, the slow ticking of the kitchen clock marked the minutes, as steady and certain as the turning of the seasons. The world, for that one golden hour, felt unbreakable, safe, tucked away from the noise and chaos, beyond the cornfields and country roads. But the funny thing about peace is show how thin it really is. Like a soap bubble floating through the air, perfect and weightless until the tiniest pressure sends it bursting out of existence. May Turner had lived long enough to know that storms didn't always announce themselves with dark clouds. Sometimes they came quietly, slipping into view while the sun was still shining, and as she rocked gently, lemonade glass cool against her palm, she had no idea that a different kind of storm was already on its way. Not a hurricane, not a fire, something colder, more human, more cruel. It was already moving, already crossing into Willow Creek, heading straight for her porch. May Turner first noticed them when the sound of heavy boots crunched up the gravel path. A sharp, foreign noise that didn't belong to the soft, easy rhythms of Willow Creek. She lowered her newspaper slightly. Squinting against the sunlight, two men were coming straight toward the porch. They wore uniforms, or something, trying very hard to look like uniforms. Dark shirts tucked into cargo pants, heavy-duty belts, boots dusted in the pale soil of the road. Their sunglasses hid their ears, but not their expressions. Even from a distance, May could see it. The hard lines of their mouths, the way they moved with a kind of arrogant purpose. Pinned awkwardly to their chests were shiny badges that caught the sun with each step. The words stamped on them read HO enforcement. Bold and official, looking at a glance, but somehow wrong, crooked, cheap. May sat a little straighter in her chair, the lemonade forgotten for the moment. She didn't stand. She didn't speak. She simply watched, her heart ticking a little faster under the soft cotton of her dress. The men didn't bother with a polite knock at the screen door. They didn't even tip their hats or offer a good morning. They stopped at the foot of the porch, planted their boots wide apart, and started talking. No, barking as if May were a disobedient child, instead of the homeowner she had been for nearly half a century. Violation of property standards. The shorter one snapped. Grass exceeds acceptable height, added the taller one, flipping through a clipboard he pulled from under his arm. Unauthorized flag display. Improper waste management receptacle. Their voices were loud, clipped, filled with the hollow authority of someone who had never been taught the real meaning of respect. For a moment, May just blinked at them, more puzzled than anything. The words barely made sense. Property standards, unauthorized flag, wrong trash can. It might have been laughable if it hadn't felt so strangely serious. She laid the newspaper across her lap and spoke, her voice calm and steady, the same way she might correct a mischievous grandchild. "There's no Homeowners Association in Willow Creek," she said, simply. Her words hung in the humid air, perfectly reasonable, perfectly firm. The taller man, the one later identified as Dave Mert, tilted his head slightly. A slow, unpleasant smile crept across his face, one corner of his mouth lifting higher than the other, as if he knew something she didn't. Not the smile of a neighbor, or even a man enforcing real rules. It was the smile of someone looking at easy prey, and behind the glint of his sunglasses, even though she couldn't see his eyes, May felt it. That small sharp prick of danger, like the first cold drop before a summer storm. The peaceful fabric of Willow Creek had started to tear right there on her porch. And May Turner, for all her years in wisdom, could sense deep down that this was no misunderstanding. Something was wrong, very wrong, and it had only just begun. It happened faster than thought. One moment May Turner was sitting tall in her chair, chin lifted, calm as ever, in the face of nonsense. The next, a sharp movement cut through the heavy morning air. Dave Mert's hand lashed out, a brutal, thoughtless arc of motion. His palm struck May across the cheek with a crack that seemed far louder than it should have been, slicing through the lazy warmth of the day. Like a knife through paper, the newspaper slipped from her hands, spinning once in the air, before falling limp onto the porch steps, its pages rustling weakly in the stunned stillness. For a breathless second, everything froze. The rocking chair, the breeze, even the far-off seekers in the trees. All fell silent, as if the world itself could not believe what had just happened. It wasn't the force of the slap that struck the hardest. It was the meaning of it, the violation, the utter disrespect laid bare under the bright, unblinking sun of Willow Creek. A slap, not just to May Turner, but to the very soul of the place she called home. May had weathered storms, that rattled the roof over her head, sicknesses that tested her strength, wars that stole friends and loved ones. She had stood firm through each trial, holding tight to the simple, stubborn dignity that had carried her through life. And now, in broad daylight, with her feet planted on the porch, she had built a life upon. That dignity had been assaulted by a stranger's hand. A few feet away, the two enforcers stood stiff and silent, as if daring the universe to challenge what had just been done. The dust along the road hung motionless, caught in the heat. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. On another day, in another place, maybe words would have risen first. Outrage, protest, action. But in that moment, Willow Creek itself seemed to reel, stunned beyond sound as something sacred cracked sharply down the middle. And deep in the silent spaces of that quiet town, something else, something older, fiercer, stirred awake. The scream from across the street shattered the silence like a thrown stone breaking glass. Mrs. Wilkins, 82 years old, cane in hand, but sharper than most half her age, stood frozen on her porch, her face pale with horror. Her voice, though cracked with age, rang out clear and strong, full of something that went deeper than fear, acre that called out wrong for everyone to hear. And here they did, all down maple and cedar. Windows slid open with soft clicks. Front doors eased ajar on creaking hinges. Heads appeared, cautious at first, peering around corners behind fences. Mothers pulled their children back inside. Elderly men straightened up from their gardens, wiping their hands on their jeans, their eyes narrowing. Whispers just traveled like brushfire on a dry summer day. What happened? Did he just? Was that May? The fake officers stood their ground, chests buffed out, even bigger now, like roosters, daring a fight. The taller one, Dave Mert, shoved a clipboard forward, his voice carrying sharp and loud across the yards. "This is official HOA business," he barked. "Non-compliance will result in fines," added the other. "Fines, arrests, citations." They spoke the words like weapons, throwing them carelessly at a community that had never needed them. They mistook the silence for fear. They mistook the stillness for surrender. But they didn't know Willow Creek. What they saw, women clutching their aprons, men wiping sweat from their brows, teenagers leaning against porch railings, wasn't submission. It was something older, something slower, something gathering strength. In that breathless moment after their slap, something deep beneath the town surface shifted. A low, quiet boil began, not wild and reckless, but deliberate and fierce. A righteous anger born, not out of vengeance, but out of something stronger, the need to protect their own. Every clenched fist, every narrowed eye, every whisper that stopped mid-sentence, it all built into a single unspoken promise. Not here, not to one of ours, not today. And though no one moved, not yet, the air itself grew, heavier, tighter, charged with the invisible weight of a town, waking up to the sound of its own fury. The men on the porch were too blinded by their own pride to feel it, but the storm had started, and it would not be ignored for long. The screen door behind May gave a long familiar creak, a sound that had accompanied 1,000 easy afternoons, but now cut through the heavy silence like a warning bell. Out onto the porch stepped Joe Turner. He was barefoot, the soles of his feet calloused from years of working the land, and he wore a pair of faded jeans and a threadbare white shirt that clung to his lean frame. His silver hair, a little disheveled from sleep, caught the morning light, and his face, weathered, lined, and steady, carried the kind of authority that couldn't be faked or borrowed. In his right hand, hanging low but firm. He held a Colt Python 357 revolver. The metal caught the sun, gleaming sharply, a thing of weight, of history. It wasn't brandished wildly or waved for effect. It simply was as much a part of Joe as a set of his shoulders, and the slow, deliberate way he moved. For a long heartbeat, no one spoke. The wind dared not stir. The seekers stayed silent. The world itself seemed to lean in closer. Joe stepped down onto the top porch step, the wood groaning softly beneath his weight, and let his gaze fall on the two men who had brought chaos to his doorstep. When he spoke, his voice was low, roughened by years, but steady as bedrock. "You boys got about 5 seconds," he said, his words slow and precise. "Toe turn around and get off my property. No shouting, no threats, just a fact delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had made peace with whatever might come next." For a moment, the fake officers wavered. Their puffed-up bravado cracked. Their smirks faltered, shrinking under the weight of something they hadn't expected, a force that wasn't fueled by anger or bluster, but by quiet, unshakable resolve. Dave shifted his weight uneasily, glancing sideways at his partner. The clipboard he had waved so confidently, eminent earlier, now hung limp at his side. The second man swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. They had come expecting fear. They had come expecting surrender. What they found instead was Joe Turner, and the unmistakable sense that if they didn't move, and move quickly, they would learn firsthand what it meant to cross the wrong line in the wrong town. And in that split second of hesitation, they made their biggest mistake. They hesitated, and Joe Turner never wasted a second when it came to protecting what was his. Joe Turner gave them no second warning, no raised voice, no threat screamed into the air, only action, swift, clean, inevitable. The Colt Python roared, a sound not of panic, but of power, low, thunderous, tearing across the porch and down the quiet streets of Willow Creek. It was a sound that shook birds loose from their perches in the oak trees, sent dogs barking in distant yards, and snapped every head within earshot toward the Turner house. The recoil jolted up Joe's arm, a sharp, familiar kick heavily noticed. He had fired that revolver before, many times in younger years, when the stakes had been just as real. But the face is different. The bullet struck the concrete with a violent crack between the two men's boots. Not into the air, not into the ground, at a safe distance. Between them, a precise warning, an unmistakable line drawn in dust and broken stone. Dust exploded upward, showering their boots and pant legs with a gritty mist, clinging to their polished black shoe. Like a brand, they staggered back instinctively, their bodies reacting faster than their minds could catch up, and then, as if the realization hit them all at once, they crumpled to the ground, hard, fast, face down on the porch boards. Arms stretched out wide, palms split, flat against the worn wood, as if hoping to anchor themselves to safety. Their bodies trembled, not from the gunfire itself, but from the cold, cutting truth that had finally broken through their arrogance. They had made a mistake, a grave one, behind Joe. From somewhere in the gathering crowd of neighbors, a voice rang out high and clear. "Sheriff's on the way." Another voice echoed it, more footsteps. The neighborhood was no longer frozen. It was waking, rising, gathering momentum, like a tide that had been held back too long. But Joe Turner didn't shift his weight, didn't glance over his shoulder, didn't even blink. He stood exactly where he was, the revolver resting loose, but ready at his side, his posture easy, almost casual, as if he was simply standing guard over his porch. Not because he wanted a fight, but because he had given his word long ago to protect what was his. The morning sun caught the steel of the Colt, throwing a sharp glint across the porch boards. The faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the heavy, humid air, mixing with the sweetness of honeysuckle and the bitter scent of disturbed concrete. Everything else, the birds, the insects, even the creaking of the trees, seemed to hold its breath. Joe's face was unreadable, carved by decades of work, loss, and perseverance. There was no anger there now, only certainty. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't bluster. It was the quiet, immovable force of a man who had spent a lifetime understanding one simple truth. You don't start fights, but you finish them, if you must. Time stretched thin around the scene, stretched taut like the skin of Adrim. Every second beat, louder than the last. And still Joe Turner stood barefoot on the porch he had built with his own hands, a living line drawn between chaos and home. He would not yield. Not today, not ever. 8 minutes. That's how long it took before the wail of sirens shattered the heavy, sweltering air of Willow Creek. Across the street, windows swung wider. Neighbors edged closer to their porches, to the sidewalks, drawn by the sound like moths to a flame. The tension that had crackled in the air moments ago shifted, not gone, but transforming into something steadier, something almost tangible. Relief. 2 squad cars came roaring down Cedar Street, tires hissing against the heated asphalt, dust spiraling in their wake. Lights flashed red and blue, painting the quiet homes in frantic color. Deputy Martinez was the first out, his boots hitting the ground hard, a hand instinctively resting on his sidearm. Behind him, Sheriff Collins, tall, broad, every inch the man built. For moments like this, stepped from his cruiser, his expression hard and unreadable beneath the brim of his worn brown hat. Their eyes swept the scene once, taking everything in. 2 men face down on the porch, a battered old truck parked crookedly near the curb, and standing above it all, calm and steady, Joe Turner, the Colt python loose in his hand, muzzle pointed at the ground, waiting. There was no need for questions, no confusion. Everything they needed to know was written in the stillness of the air and the posture of the people around them. Deputy Martinez crossed the yard in 3 long strides, kneeled, and quickly cuffed the first man, then the second. Neither one resisted. The bravado, the smirks, all of it had drained from them, leaving only pale faces and trembling hands. From the cab of their battered truck, the deputies pulled out a mess of paperwork, fake HOA citations, printed to look official, forged violation notices, lists with dozens of names, elderly homeowners, many living alone, each marked with notes and addresses, targets. There were no weapons found. They hadn't needed them. Their weapon had been fear, deception spun into authority, designed to bully and control, but not here, not today. Sheriff Collins studied the stack of fake documents, his jaw tightening. He turned, then slowly facing Joe Turner. The old man hadn't moved an inch from where he stood, the revolver still at his side, the porch light glinting faintly off the polished barrel. For a long, heavy moment the 2 men, one in uniform, the other in time-worn denim, simply regarded each other, and then, without a word, the sheriff lifted his hand and gave a slow, deliberate nod. A nod of understanding, a nod of respect. Joe Turner responded the only way a man like him would. He lowered the Colt carefully, sliding his finger away from the trigger, letting the weapon hang easy at this side once again. There was no need for words between them. Not in a town like Willow Creek, not between men who knew the cost of protecting what mattered. The sirens faded into the distance. The neighborhood began to exhale, cautiously, slowly, as if afraid to believe the danger had truly passed. And on that weathered old porch, Joe Turner stood tall under the rising sun, not as a hero seeking glory, but simply as a man who had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. At the hospital, May Turner sat upright in her bed, a thin bruise darkening her left cheekbone, a mark of the violence she'd endured, but also of the strength she'd shown. Doctors came and went, nodding approvingly at her vitals, shaking their heads in disbelief at her spirit. She listened politely to their instructions, smiled through their concerned glances, and when Deputy Martinez stopped by to check on her, she gave him the same small, steady grin she always gave her neighbors, the kind that said, "Don't you worry about me, dear. I've seen worse and come through it just fine." Her heroic smile, gentle, unbroken, said more than any words could. Meanwhile, back on Maple and Cedar, something subtle but powerful shifted through the streets of Willow Creek. It wasn't loud. It wasn't celebrated with banners or parades. It was something deeper, a silent oath shared between neighbors, sealed with nods across front lawns and quiet words over fences. Pride, fierce, stubborn pride, and something more, a bond made stronger by fire. Joe Turner wasn't charged, not with anything, not even close. Sheriff Collins made sure the message was clear, not just to Joe, but everyone within earshot. Standing on the steps of the county courthouse later that afternoon, flanked by deputies and a few gathered townsfolk, he spoke in a voice that carried steady and true, an armed citizen defending his family from assault. That's called justice around here. No apology, no footnotes, just the truth. Plain and undeniable. Word spread faster than wildfire on a windy day. By sunset, the story had traveled through every diner booth, every church gathering, every barber shop and front porch within 50 miles, and by Sunday morning, when the first light spilled over the rooftops of Willow Creek, a quiet revolution had taken place. Hand-painted signs appeared like wildflowers after rain, nailed to porch rails, planted in front yards, stuck to mailbox posts, some big, some small, but all bearing the same 3 lines, bold and proud. No trespassing, no fake cops, no mercy. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't fear. It was a promise to themselves, to their neighbors, to their town, a promise that what had happened to May Turner would not happen again. Not here. Not while there was breath left in their lungs and strength in their hands. Willow Creek had been tested, and it had answered, not with violence, for violence's sake, but with something stronger, with unity, with resolve, with a simple, unwavering truth. Protect your own, stand your ground, remember who you are, and in the heart of it all, on a weathered old porch, May Turner sipped her lemonade, the bruising on her face already beginning to fade, and smiled into the golden morning. Justice had come, and it had come home. From that day forward, something subtle yet unbreakable settled over Willow Creek. It wasn't just Astri people told. It was a truth, stitched into the very fabric of the town, like the stitching on an old, well-worn quilt. You could hear it whispered at the general store, in the low murmur of voices over coffee at Millie's diner, or in the way newcomers were quietly pulled aside and told with a knowing smile, if you come to Willow Creek looking for trouble, you're not just picking a fight with one man. You're staring down the spirit of an entire town. People said it half and sometimes, with a chuckle or a shake of the head, but underneath the smiles was something real, a quiet, steadfast pride that didn't need banners or speeches to make itself known. It was there in the way neighbors looked out for one another a little more closely. It was there in the new signs posted on every porch. A simple silent agreement that some things were still worth protecting, and it was there most of all, on the porch of that weathered White House, at the corner of Maple and Cedar. Every afternoon, once the sun began to lower itself behind the trees, and the psychers started their evening chorus, May Turner would settle back into her rocking chair. A glass of lemonade would rest cool in her hand, the faint clink of ice cubes marking the rhythm of the slow, peaceful hours. The bruise on her cheek faded, just like the seasons turned, and the flowers bloomed again, but the pride in her smile that stayed. It was a different kind of smile now, not just the gentle warmth of a woman content with her quiet life, but the quiet pride of someone who had stood, endured, and been lifted by her people. Inside the house, tucked away where the sunlight couldn't reach it, Grandpa Joe's Colt python still rested, unfired since that morning, its polished surface catching just the faintest gleam when the door swung open. Silent, but ready. Not because Joe expected another fight, not because he wanted one, but because some things, some promises, were too important to ever lay down fully. And as the days turned into months and the months into years, the story of that Saturday morning became more than just memory. It became legend, a reminder that in Willow Creek, family meant more than blood. It meant standing shoulder to shoulder. It meant doing what was right, even when it was hard. It meant that sometimes, when the world tried to forget, a small town could still remember how to be brave. And every time May Turner rocked gently in her chair, smiling into the golden light of another quiet evening, Willow Creek smiled right along with her, because the heart of a town, just like the spirit of its people, never truly fades. It just grows stronger with every story.